Today, I am very excited to have a friend on the podcast. Firstly, because I have actually realized I've never had a close friend on the podcast before. But I'm also really excited because I'm talking to Ceri, who has just published her first cookbook. Welcome to the podcast, Ceri.
Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So excited. So, tell us about yourself and who you are and about your cookbook.
So I'm Kerry. I'm a food educator primarily these days, and almost published writer. Well, will be tomorrow. I am also a retreat chef, and I live in Southeast London. And I use cooking as the tool to look after myself, nourish myself, and I'm really passionate about encouraging people to cook from scratch from home, enjoy cooking, helping people with their cooking skills in order to enjoy cooking a bit more and not feel like it's so much of a chore.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is the biggest problem. When you think about cooking, people often do find it a chore and lose that inspiration and excitement. And actually, it's something that commonly happens. I think it's certainly happened with me. And I know a lot of people say that after they become a mum, it becomes particularly like a chore because it is day in, day out, and you're going to cater for these fussy eaters. And oh, it can be, I've definitely found myself losing that love. Um, and it does take things like reading a new cookbook to kind of get that inspiration back. So let's start by talking about the cookbook because it is very exciting. I know it's been a while, quite a while in the making. So what is the cookbook about? What's
It
the
has, yeah.
concept?
So yeah, I've wanted to write a cookbook for since I left my previous job that wasn't food related 12 years ago. So cooking and writing cookbook was something that was always on the agenda for me, and I'm thrilled that I finally been able to do it. So the book is about vegetables really. So vegetable forward cooking, or where vegetables are the star of the meal. So the cookbook's called It Starts with Veg, and the idea to call it that came from me thinking that actually every recipe in the book has been devised by starting by using veg as the starting point. So I've got a bunch of tomatoes in my fridge. What am I going to do with them? And then build the dish from there rather than saying, oh, I'm going to have this and then I'll have tomatoes on the side, so that it really makes them part of the dish. And so the book covers 40 different vegetables, which are grouped together in families for the chapters, but actually, the chapters are just there to provide structure. It doesn't really, the book's more about the 40 vegetables. And then each vegetable has an introduction page, which kind of highlights different varieties of that particular vegetable you might find, different colors, how you might cook it. So lots of different ways to cook a vegetable. My favorite things to do with it, and then some flavor pairing ideas, and then maybe a quick recipe idea in the top tip, and then anything else. And then it moves on to the recipes. So there are 2 or 3 recipes for each vegetable, which was
Yeah.
very hard with something like tomatoes, because you could write a whole book about tomato recipes.
Yeah, you really could. And I like that concept about making the vegetables the star of the meal, because I think it is quite easy to kind of start often with the meat. Like, say you've got a packet of mince, so you're going to make a bolognese or whatever, and then think, well, I guess I better sling a salad together and kind of, have a bit of token. So I think this kind of flips it a little bit, doesn't it? And be like, what's the veg that you have and what can you make around it?
Yeah, I mean, I do obviously cook like that sometimes as well. The idea of a book being a nice curated collection of vegetables where they're all on a certain theme, but that is the majority how I cook. So if I'm ever doing a chef job and I'm trying to plan the menu, I'll look first what's in season and then pick out those vegetables and then build the dishes from there. So it's sort of just a different approach to thinking about how you're going to plan your meals. And mostly because I used to get a veg bag, well, I still get a veg bag, and being left with random things in the fridge like kohlrabi. I've had a kohlrabi in my fridge for 3 weeks now. True story. It's not my favorite vegetable. And going, what do I do with this? And how do I make this part of my dish? And kind of stopping people, wasting food and throwing it away because they don't know what to do with it, especially for the slightly more odd things. So that was the theme that I wanted to bring into.
Yeah. And I recognize that as well because I get a veg box and there's always one or two veg in there that I'm like, oh, I just don't know what to do with this. Or
Cabbage.
I've yeah, oh, celery. Celery is my big problem because I don't really like
Oh,
it
I love
raw.
celery.
But
I
I
love
did see you've got a
celery.
whole chapter on celery, and I think you kind of talked about braising it until it was buttery, and I thought, well, that sounds nice. Like I would never think of celery as buttery, but yeah, I can get on board with a buttery
It
celery.
is. I think celery is quite misunderstood as a vegetable. And I write about this in the book, how it's got loads of bad rap for being, oh, we were always told when I know you're a teenager, oh, if you chew celery, you burn more calories chewing it than you
Oh,
do
yeah.
consuming it, and having that really negative kind of health connotation. But actually, if you break it down, like celery is a really important part of cooking and always goes with carrots and onions at the base of, lots of recipes. And then actually, I sort of came up with a recipe is for using mussels, where the main flavor of the base of the sauce is celery, and it has an incredible flavor. And I think people forget that because they think, oh, it's got a stringy texture. But if you use it in the right way and get the flavor from it, and then with the braised recipe, I'd always known that braised recipe celery was a thing, and it took me about 4 or 5 attempts to get the recipe right, because actually you just need to cook the celery for a really long time, and then when it finally all the fibers in it kind of like let go and break down, you get this wonderful flavor and texture from it. So I hope when people cook that, they've got the patience to cook it for as long as it needs to, because that's how it really transforms it.
Yeah. And I like that about celery because I think it's the same about a lot of veg. We kind of have very fixed ideas that celery is something you eat raw and you eat it in a salad, or you eat it, like with hummus as a dip or whatever.
Yeah.
And and actually there are lots of different ways to think about food, and it's a bit like lettuce. I think you talk you've in your book as well, you have a cooked lettuce recipe. And I remember the
Yeah.
first time cooking lettuce, or someone saying about cooking lettuce, I was like, well, that's a bit weird. But it works really, really well. It's really great in a stir fry.
Yeah, it's delicious. I think again, lettuce is that, I also talk in the book about how my association with lettuce is like a few leaves in a burger, which I think is how lots of us are introduced to lettuce. And actually, it works really well there. It's really nice and crunchy and gives you that what you need. But there's loads more that you can do with it. And just having it plain in a salad on its own, especially some of the plain lettuce, is just not that interesting. But there is lots you can do and cook it and bring all the other flavors in. And yeah, so worth exploring different ways of cooking vegetables to get the best flavor out of them, not just the way that you might think you've to do it or you've always done it.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So I wanted to talk a bit about your approach to food and cooking, because I think we've had quite a similar journey about around healthy eating, healthy cooking, training in that kind of field, and then coming round to something that is a little less rigid and strict. So let's talk about how you got into kind of, I guess, healthy cooking.
Into healthy cooking. I think so hard, isn't it? I think I came into the idea of cooking healthily in my early 20s as a weight loss tool. And I think this would be a similar story for many. Oh, I need to be healthier, I need to lose weight, whatever, finish university and all the drinking that we did then. And so got into, looking at different recipes to cook for myself at home, and all of that kind of came in. And through that, I realized that I really enjoyed cooking, which is a great outcome. Um, but the sort of maybe the obsession with the health kind of went a bit too far, and I was introduced to the concept of paleo eating, which I know you know lots about as well, by some people I used to train with in the gym, and to me that felt like it made sense. And kind of I went down that route for quite a few years, and I think I thought it was serving me at the time, and maybe it did, I don't know. It was also a really difficult period in my time. My dad had just passed away, and then my mum got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I think the whole focus on health then took over, because I was like, I want to be healthy. And even though both my parents, obviously tried their best to be healthy, I was like, I must be healthy. This must be the thing that, can, save us all. It's quite hard talking about this, but like I feel like that's maybe why, looking back, I kind of got pulled down that route and maybe took it a bit too far. But there we go. It is what it is, but it did get me into cooking, and I found that actually I really enjoyed the creativity of cooking, and understanding about flavor and color and the texture, and that being really exciting. And then at some point in my life, that bit came more interesting than the nutrition and the science side of things that I'd always kind of struggled with. And then I kind of felt like I found my way to kind of combine everything together in a kind of bit more balanced way.
Yeah. And you started blogging.
I
Am I
started
allowed to?
blogging.
Can I mention Cucina Kerry?
Yeah, I'm so embarrassed about it, but yes, you can.
So I think that is when I found you. I think you were
Yeah.
still Cucina Ceri, and taking I mean, yeah, your first recipe. I remember you kind of put this on social media, didn't you? That your first recipe that you put on the blog was a courgette carbonara. So that's a
Courgette carbonara, yeah, not a real carbonara at all.
not a real carbonara at all, and doesn't really work. It goes too soggy, I
No,
think.
it's too soggy.
Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, so I similarly had that same experience with paleo and thinking this makes sense and this is how everyone should eat and it will solve world, disease and
yeah,
all the problems in the world, and definitely similarly led me to train in as a nutritional therapist and then as a natural chef as well. So it is definitely interesting that we've had a very similar journey. What do you think it is about paleo that made sense at the time and then stopped making sense?
I think the idea of eating natural, unprocessed foods, so things that haven't been played with, just to me, see, and that still makes sense, and that's still how I strive to eat, but obviously not as strictly. Um, that just, but I mean, not because I thought that cavemen were healthier, which is how where paleo kind of is centered, but the idea of the unprocessedness, I was always quite embarrassed, kind of linking it to the Paleolithic era because I don't know anything about that, but it was the unprocessedness of things and cooking from scratch really. But where I think paleo felt down, it was also like no legumes, and not allowing any flexibility within what you're eating, and maybe perhaps too much meat and fish as well. And actually moving forwards now, thinking about more sustainably and financially, I can't afford to eat grass-fed beef every day, nor do I want to. So I feel like that's where it sort of becomes quite a privileged diet because only people who can
Mm.
afford it can follow it, which is not what we should be promoting, I don't think. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Yeah, and I totally agree. The thing that never made sense to me was not being able to eat peanut butter and chickpeas and lentils. It just didn't ever feel correct. And obviously now that I am, trained in nutrition and so on, I understand the nuances of that. It was a very like rigid interpretation of a single nutrient that might be
Yeah,
problematic in some people if they're not cooked properly. I mean, it's so
yeah,
so nuanced.
yeah.
um and I feel that like we have both evolved towards this, because I mean it was also grain free and gluten free and all of these
Mm,
free, dairy free
yeah.
and all of these things, and I feel like we've both come like back kind of almost full circle, but with that kind of idea that it's the wholesome, full, whole, homemade, whole food idea, but that also it's accepting everything is okay, especially ice cream.
Yep, especially ice cream, which is my favorite thing in the world ever, and chocolate.
Yeah, exactly. And that to me feels like the healthiest kind of approach, to have that acceptance of everything is
I think
welcome.
so. And trying to follow a diet that is so strict, it then brings stresses into your life. Like, eating out felt okay because you could probably control what you ordered on a menu to make sure that you were still paleo. But going to other people's houses used to make me feel really stressed because I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to follow my diet today. And that is where it is really unhealthy. Whereas, having flexibility to just make it much more balanced and enjoyable is just, yeah, it's just so nicer to be free of any of
Yeah.
that stress around food at all now. I just love it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally in agreement. And
Mm,
and just feeling relaxed around food, I think,
yeah,
has been revolutionary to me. And I think I'd say my 20s were defined by this kind of like obsession around, is this correct? Is this right? Is this good paleo? Is it not? And my 30s, especially I guess my second half of my 30s, has been that much more relaxed. And I've
yeah.
just I've stopped weighing myself, I've stopped looking in the mirror and feeling critical and all of these things that I feel like I wasted so much of my early sort of adulthood on.
Yeah, I think it's quite complex. Obviously, I had counselling quite a bit a few years ago after my mum passed away, and I felt like even though I didn't necessarily talk about food in the counselling, it was working out everything that I felt like that really helped me sort of move my path into a completely different direction and really relax all of that. So it's obviously something psychological, and I think that's the thing with lots of people why they might go down a really strict diet route. There's something complex psychologically going on there. So yeah, that's yeah, it's a tricky thing, and I think no one needs to be that strict. And if they are, there's something else going on and a reason why they might perhaps be doing that.
Yeah, yeah, totally. So a big focus of the cooking that you do, but also the cookbook in particular, is around seasonal eating. Why do you think it matters to eat vegetables in season or any food in season?
Any food in season. First of all, it tastes best. So when things are, at their best in season, they're obviously going to taste the freshest. They've generally had less air miles. So if you're eating asparagus here in May rather than eating asparagus from Peru in February, obviously it's come less far. It's like supporting our local farmers as well. So anything that you're buying UK wise or in the right season, and supporting small farms as well, which is why I get a veg box, because I think that's really important for our economy. And then there's the excitement of waiting for things to come into season and then celebrating them for while they're here, and then they go, and then that's fine, and then you look forward to them coming back again, and it's this whole like rhythm of the year. And we're the same with, oh, it's warm outside, I'm looking forward to wearing my sandals. It's that similar kind of thing, because if our temperature and climate was the same all year round, it'd be quite boring. And I think maybe that's why, I know we all moan about the cold here in the UK, but it's that kind of rhythm of the seasons. And so food kind of following that just feels like it kind of just all makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, kind of celebrating abundance. So when you have a glut of courgettes and a glut of tomatoes because that's in season,
Yes.
um, and doing the best you can from it. How easy is it to do that, to kind of eat in season?
If you don't know what's in season, it's incredibly hard. And I think I was introduced to the concept of seasonal eating probably when I did my chef training. So I went to California to do my chef training. And obviously they have an abundance of amazing seasonal produce there because of the climate. And but still have seasonality within that. And I think before that, I was like, I don't think I'd really thought about what was in season. And, I'd been blogging for a couple of years before I went to go and do my chef training, and sort of looking back on those early recipes, there was no thought of seasonality at all. I just
Mm.
went to the supermarket and bought what I wanted. I don't think I even understood that it was a thing. I, hadn't grown up with that as a concept. Um, and so moving forwards, kind of getting that and going and shopping at farmers markets, kind of sort of made me interested in it. But it is difficult to do because I mean, I get a veg box now. I get one every other week because it's too much produce for me otherwise. But there will be times when I'm like, I need to go and buy something from the supermarket, or I went to my little mini Tesco yesterday to go and buy a few bits. And there's no real sense of seasonality there at all, unless you look at the packets or um, you really know what you're looking for, and it just doesn't really make sense. So I think if you're not aware of it and you're shopping in small shops and things like that, then it is quite hard to do. And also, when you get to the time of year when there isn't much seasonal produce about, which is traditionally is the hungry gap, it's usually kind of like early spring, um, before all the new season's crops are ready. There isn't very much around, and so then it's quite hard to do as well, especially in the UK where we have that. So yeah, it's not that easy, but we try. And again, talking about what you're going to bring into your diet and what you're going to cook, it is all about balance. So I'm not striving to be a perfectionist on this at all. It's just the idea of trying to celebrate a bit more, following the seasons, and providing you a toolkit in order to do that.
Yeah. And because I used to always talk about local food, like always buying locally and all of that. But
Yeah,
there are certain veg at certain times of the year, like because you can now get tomatoes, British tomatoes, year round. But that's not necessarily the best, actually, environmentally, is it? I remember reading a blog about the fact that actually tomatoes grown in the UK in like February probably actually quite bad for the environment because means being grown in kind of greenhouses or polytunnels or whatever.
yeah.
And so at certain times of the year, actually, it's fine and maybe great to buy tomatoes from Spain or Italy.
Exactly. And I think this is one thing that's really hard as the consumer. We don't have that data. I don't have access to that data. And knowing actually, it's like the whole thing about plastic bags about bad, right? So we're going to give everyone canvas bags. I've probably got about 20 canvas bags in
Yeah.
various states of decay lying around my house. I don't know the data on using a plastic bag 10 times versus using a canvas bag for a year and then having to throw that away because it's got broken. So I think there's lots of things we try to do our best with sustainability, but as a consumer, we're not always given the data to make the best decision. So again, you can only do so much. But yeah, definitely with tomatoes, like they will be polytunnel grown or under heat or whatever they might need to do in order to get them to grow or force them to grow slightly out of season in this country. So it's a complex situation.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I guess, that kind of tip at the start, really, which was around getting a veg box, shopping in farmers markets, and talking to the producers as well. Like if you get to a farmers market, or even just a local greengrocer, they know where they get their veg from. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I used to write the newsletter for my local veg box scheme, and they'd get like notes from the field from the farmers each week, and we'd put snippets of that in the newsletter. And it was really through kind of like writing that and sharing all that information, sort of began to understand like the stresses that the farmers go to in order to bring us produce, and how the weather can have a real impact on crops and all of that stuff that again I don't think the consumers that aware of. So, being more in tune with all of that can help you then, I guess, make those decisions.
yeah. And it is hard because the supermarkets just cloud it, don't they? They say, "Oh, these are available year round, and we're always here for you. You'll always get your whatever veg," and it does completely negate those struggles that our British small farmers
Yeah.
particularly go through.
But then when it comes to something like fruit, like I'm as guilty as anyone for eating bananas the entire time. And even with things like apples and stuff like that, that really are kind of an autumn thing, we will eat them year round. So it's really hard to do
Yeah,
all of it and be authentic. So, you
yeah.
just do your best.
Yeah, and pick your battles as well. I mean,
Exactly.
a lot of mums of toddlers will testify to how popular berries are, and you have to work really hard not to buy a raspberry in November or December
Yeah.
if you're gonna be strong about seasonal eating.
Mm,
One of the things that you do is you said at the start was about being a food educator, and you kind of run cooking classes as well
mm.
for kids. How do you help the kids that you teach get interested in vegetables? I have a very fussy eater for a son, and he eats a grand total of two vegetables sporadically.
It's hard, and the seasonality thing is really hard as well, because especially when we're doing cookery classes and I'm focusing on knife skills, like some vegetables are really hard to chop. Potatoes are really hard to chop. Sweet potatoes are like, they're so hard. Butternut squash is really hard. So if I want to do a class involving those ingredients to try and introduce them at that particular time of year, like I have to think about ways that we can do that in the class where it isn't everybody chopping them. So, cherry tomatoes, peppers, courgettes are brilliant because and mushrooms, but kids never like mushrooms, are really soft, and really, we use plastic knives and have a whole way of doing that and getting kids interested in vegetables by chopping them and all cooking together. Which, there's been some research that kids are more likely to try food if they have had an involvement in cooking it. So I guess just involving them in the process is the way that we get to do it. But I still find that there are kids who won't touch food that we've made. And again, pick your battles. And we have I always say it'd be nice if you wanted to try this, because we've just spent 2 hours working together to produce this meal, but no one is forced to eat anything,
Mm.
because that can give all sorts of other traumas. So that's how we do it. So we do get fussy eaters quite a lot of the time, and then I just leave them be. But I don't have kids myself, so I always salute the mums who have to go through these battles on a daily basis,
Yeah.
rather than me just in the school holidays.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, I mean, my son is an absolute sponge. So if he were to come to one of your classes, he would take on absolutely everything that you ever tell him about that veg that he's chopped. He won't eat
Yeah,
it, but
yeah.
he'll come back and tell me about it, which means that even though he's touched, he's not going to eat it, he's touched it, he's probably smelt it, he's had a sensory experience and has all this knowledge about, what a pepper is, and why, why we include it in food or whatever other snippets of information. He will retain that, and it will come back, eventually, and he'll try it.
I mean, that's what we hope as well. It's like you're setting up, little nuggets of information that maybe in, 5 or 10 years' time they might come back to and remember that they had that experience. So it's not about going, you can't aim to change people's palates and interests and excitement for, vegetables or cooking in a 2-hour session, but
Mm.
know that you might be just sowing the seeds for something to come back later.
Yeah, yeah, and I always say I was a really fussy eater as a
I
child.
was too. I was too.
And here we are,
Yeah,
nutritionist,
I know.
chef, published a cookbook, so it does get
Yeah,
come right in the end.
exactly.
Um, so this episode is going out in early June. So I would love to know, what is your favorite early summer vegetable? And what would you do with it?
So, thought about this. Um, I guess we're coming to the end of the asparagus season now, and I know everybody loves asparagus, and I do, but it is not my favorite spring vegetable. And I would say that I really love purple sprouting broccoli. We are again definitely coming to sort of the end of that now. It is more of an earlier spring, but you might still see bits coming around. But I absolutely love it. I think it's way nicer than asparagus and for a spring vegetable. And I like just roasting it, which is not what people usually boil or steam it. Just roasting it with olive oil and salt in its long, lovely long spears, and then just eating them by hand as they come out of the oven. And the little florets are really crispy, a little bit salty in there. But the recipe that I've done in the book for purple sprouting broccoli is just a puff pastry tart with ricotta, and then the spears, beautiful purple spears of broccoli on top. And then an olive tapenade as well. That sounds fancy, but it's actually really easy to do. And I think if you roast the purple broccoli, you're more likely to keep a little bit more of the purple colour. If you steam or boil it, then a bit more of the purple kind of dissipates into the water. So that's the best way of kind of keeping its a little bit of its colour, and for it to be exciting. And yeah, I prefer it to regular broccoli, but there's room in our diets for everything.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and actually roasting broccoli, I mean, the normal broccoli was such a revelation to me. And yeah, same with the purple sprouting broccoli. Um, and yeah, what you said about it retaining color is a key one. And also nutritionally, a lot of the water soluble vitamins get lost in the water
Yeah.
if you boil it. So roasting and steaming it as well can kind of help manage that a little bit. So yeah. Yeah, love it. And I love that you're saying that asparagus isn't your favorite veg. It's a bit like saying, you prefer raspberries over strawberries. You're kind of not really
I
allowed, but
do prefer raspberries over strawberries. Yeah, no, I do love asparagus, but I think when I was testing recipes for the book, which I did over a 6 month period, it was quite intense. And it was great. My diet was amazing that entire time. I was like eating all these amazing meals every day. And I have to say, I'm not that good in my normal life. Um, but really, really honing in on trying all the vegetables. I'd eaten all before anyway, but reminding yourself of which ones you really like and which one you didn't, and finding ways to really enjoy the flavour of Jerusalem artichokes, which I wouldn't normally buy because can't get them everywhere. And all of that stuff was a really nice way of kind of reminding myself of what I liked and what I didn't. And everybody loves tomatoes. I love tomatoes, but kohlrabi, it's not that exciting. But I tried my best, and the two recipes in the book I'm really proud of. So
yeah. And I guess in a way that's what's great, is that you haven't just chosen your kind of 40 favorite vegetables. You've chosen the ones that, some of your faves and some that actually you need a bit of work on, and have come up with some really great ways to cook them.
yeah, swede was another one as well. Actually, I really quite like the flavour of swede, but swede just doesn't have it's not a sexy vegetable in the
No.
same way tomatoes a sexy vegetable. Swede is not, but actually, if you think about the flavour, it's actually really nice, and I think it's just got a bit of a whiff when you cook it. So again, finding different ways to cook these vegetables and kind of going, every single recipe in the book I am really proud of, and there are a couple who, I could have just shoved them in and gone, that's okay, that'll do, but I didn't want to do that, so I wanted to make sure that every single one would be one that I'd be excited to cook and would cook again. So really, yeah, really made that a
Yeah,
thing.
that's key. And Swede, and I think it's the same with celeriac. My problem with them is that they're always massive, so you can't just have them for one
Oh,
single
it's
meal.
massive.
So
Yeah,
actually having 2 or 3 recipes in the book to kind of say, well, here's a couple of other things that you can do with it is helpful, because once you've done the kind of Swede and carrot mash, which is my
yeah,
usual, you need a bit more inspiration for the other three
yeah,
quarters.
yeah, absolutely. Cabbage as well. I dread getting cabbage in my veg box because it just, as a single person household, just takes you days, and you find, I mean, yeah, I've had coleslaw now 5 days in a row. I'm a bit bored. But yeah, there are ways of getting through things or preserving them, or so can be done.
Yeah. Yeah, lovely. Well, thank you so much. So where can people buy the book and find out more about you?
So my website is cerijoneschef.com. Very important to spell my name right there. It's good to see. And on all socials, I'm Ceri Jones Chef. And then the book is available in all leading retailers that you would possibly imagine. And if you don't want to buy it online, obviously you can go into your local bookshop and ask them to get it in for you, and they should be able to do that, which is a really nice way, again, to support local. So yeah, everywhere it starts with veg, look for it now.
Thank you so much for coming on. I'll put all of those links to your website and the socials and to the book as well on the show notes so people can find that.
Amazing. Thanks, Tasha.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Nice to chat. Bye.